This would be the beginning of almost any time that we use our portable bandsaw mill. Now, the first thing we do is obviously unlock it from the container. And then we have a protective cover over, as you can see all the water coming off. It does a pretty decent job about keeping the whole power head and the motor dry. You might be wondering why we're adding the battery to it. We don't just keep it on it. Well, batteries over a long period will end up going dead if just left out in the elements, especially with the changing in the weather from hot to cold. So we take it off, store it inside on a trickle charger, so we always have a fresh, good, powerful battery. Then we have the CEO come out, check over everything, and then we lower the power head down, slightly tighten up the blade, tension it. We always keep it untensioned when not in use so it doesn't deform the wheels. And then of course, if it's been sitting for more than a couple days before our last mill job, we'll re-grease all the bearings just to make sure nothing gets stuck or we don't explode bearings. Then of course, add gas to this 20 horsepower motor. It does a pretty decent job. We can cut as wide as an LT40 at 36 inches and handle a log that is 40 inches wide if you make your cant cuts. And one benefit about this mill, how light it is. We can move it all by hand. And then we have our CEO giving us a push in the back. Kind of gives up halfway, but she's never far behind. As you can see here, she's pulling it with all of her might. We're moving it around the corner where we have customer logs that we've been needing to get done. So our first order of business on this is to rotate these logs into a fashion that's going to be more productive on loading onto the mill. As you can see, we find the fulcrum or the center point, put a board down, rotate those logs on 90 degrees, and then we do the same for the other 3 logs. Now typically we have customers deliver logs in a different fashion. That way we don't have to roll them. They're already stacked up. But beggars can't be choosers. The logs got here. The customer wants them milled. We'll make it work. Now what we're using is called a cant hook. This one is made by Cooksaw. It can handle up to a 36-inch wide log. It's only $100 shipped to your house. It's made of tube stock and is extremely, extremely heavy duty. We've ran it over with an excavator. Actually just forgot it on the ground when a customer was moving logs around when we were on site. And you can also stick a bar in the end, increasing your leverage, because that's what you use when you roll these logs over. As you can tell, it is a vital piece of equipment in logging, well, milling, especially portable milling. Since we don't own any heavy industrial equipment, where we're located, I don't have enough room in our yard for a telehandler or a bobcat, but we're in the market right now to hopefully get something that makes this 10 times easier, loading 10 times quicker, and then unloading and loading the kiln even faster. But in the meantime, you got to use the old brute force method to get things how you want them and to line everything up. So we use a Sequoia Mills SM136. We don't have a Woodmizer, though maybe in the future we will get one, but in the time being, the cost of the Woodmizer when we bought this one was significantly higher. We paid just under $9,000 for this mill delivered, and the Woodmizer at that time was 40-something thousand plus tax. So to get our head in the game as quickly as possible and get things rolling, we ended up going with this model, and we've been happy with it. It's been a fantastic piece of equipment, but I will say having hydraulics would be a significant plus. Now these Douglas Fir logs are about 10 feet long, about 20-inch to 23-inch in diameter. So they're decent sized logs, not huge, not small. So once we got them all rolled to how we need them, we're going to get this bad boy onto more level ground. There is a pretty bad slope on the road, but now we're at a much easier place to line everything up. Now we're going to warm the motor up just to get everything ready, and then we get to go and do the fun things. Well, the brief intermission of fun things. Fastest way to the mill right here. Got a little shop cart. Give it a little push here. Now we get the fun process of leveling the mill. Now in the video it looks like it takes a lot longer than it does, but we're also trying to get video footage of everything. So we're trying to do things in a different process than we normally would. But we're going to make sure that we're level the lengthways of the mill. And would you believe it or not, we are in fact level. And now the next process would be to level across the bunks themselves, or you could think about it as the y-axis and the x-axis, making sure each one of those are level and then rechecking. Easiest way we found to level is to bring the axle up and leveling off of that, and then making sure when we drop all the feet all the way around it that we stay level every which way, which once the axle's level, it's pretty easy to drop all the feet and keep everything level. But we've done enough work, so now it's time for a little bit more play as we bring down the loading ramps as well as the log loading attachment. So now we're going to start bringing down all the feet, making sure everything's level. As you see, we have the level across at the whole time, and every single time we drop a foot, we just make sure that it stays there. I think our next upgrade to this machine is to weld on some plates and just do some hand crank feet, kind of like the front of the mill is, or more trailer tongue levelers, just to make the process go quicker. And then if anything were to happen while we're milling, drop a big log on it, hit it with the excavator, have done that. We don't have to re-level everything. We just crank the handles, level it out there. Right there you see us undoing the bolts so we can actually move the power head up and down the carriage. Those are used to lock the power head from when we are traveling mobile or just moving it around so it doesn't go all over the place. And now we're going to bring out the log attachment. Basically it is an electric winch hooked to the top of this pole, and then we hook it up to the battery. Here we're using 4x4s and 4x6s, just a bunch of dunnage as ramps. We're going to put up some log stops so you don't roll the log off the back of the mill. I've never done it, but I can't imagine it's a very fun thing when you load a log on and it goes off the other side. We're going to give ourselves some slack. That's enough to go over the log, underneath it, and bring it back to the mill, because we load using what is called par buckling. It is using mechanical advantage to double the lifting power or pulling power of this 2,500 pound winch up to about 5,000. So we're going to hook it up to the battery, start the motor, so we have the alternator creating a current so we don't just suck the battery dry. Of course, ours is Bluetooth, and we're going to bring in the slack, and that gives us the opportunity to go behind the log, use the cant hook in junction with the winch to load up the log. We could just let the winch do all the work, but instead of beating up all of our equipment, we'll help it up because it doesn't take much, but as you can see with one hand, just to help that log all the way up. Once we have everything all loaded up and the winch tightened up, we do the old lower the ramps and unhook the battery. Now remember, when you hook up a battery, positive, negative, negative, positive. Remember that? Same thing when you jump a car. Positive, negative, negative, positive, in that order. Now we're looking here that we're only going to hit one log stop. So to ensure that we get even pressure all the way across the log, we're just going to load up this 4x4 as it hits the stops. And then we're going to kind of do what is called sandwiching. We're going to get another 4x4 on the other side and just sandwich this log in. Now, if we were long enough that we hit either one of the log stops, or at least two log stops, we wouldn't need the 4x4, but we don't on this one. And now, since we are doing Douglas Fir, we have a little bit of diesel left in this container, and we're going to load up the diesel. The diesel acts as a fantastic lubricant for softwoods. You can also use hardwoods, but then you're just smelling like diesel. But we don't have enough left, so when we do mill hardwoods, all we use is Dawn dish detergent and water. You can also use like window washing fluid for your car. That's what actually quite a few people use. We're just going to top this off with some Dawn. That way we keep the blades nice and clean. Right here we're going to size up the log, adjust our blade guide, and then we're going to run our hand winch all the way down back to the back of the mill. That way we're not pushing the power head. We can just rotate the crank and it'll pull the power head all the way through. Kind of like Matt Cremona, as this is a very similar style to Matt Cremona's, if not identical. His is just significantly larger. So we made sure the blade was pretty well tight and started the motor, and now you see us kind of milling through this first jacket cut. Now this is a blade that is not brand new. We don't really remember how much we cut on it, but it's our very first cut, so we'll kind of gauge if we need to replace the blade now or later. And on this cut, it actually seemed like it was coming out pretty well, nice and flat, though we were going a little bit slow just to make sure. And I'm pretty sure this is where you're supposed to enter in the ooh and the ah, as this is probably one of the most satisfying parts of milling, is when you open up the log for the first time and just see the beautiful wood inside of it. We don't typically do this, but here's a level. It is level, and it's pretty stinking flat for the whole 6 feet. Just verifying that our cut is flat and even all the way across. Now that we got that first cut, what we're going to do is remove the 4x. We're going to stick it up underneath, and you'll see why here in a second. And then we're going to rotate this log. So the jacket cut is now on the bottom, and then we will make parallel cuts from there on down, ensuring that we have nice flat and even material. So as you see, the reason why we leave this piece of wood on the other side is so when we do roll it, it'll fall onto that piece of wood, not falling off the mill, making this process a bit easier. We used to rotate it up and then shimmy it back to make sure it landed on the bunks, but found out if I just put those cross members across, it can flop almost off the side of the mill, but it'll still be hung up and on the mill. We can just push it right where it needs to go. Obviously, I noticed that the log was sticking a little bit farther over than I needed it to be, as it would hit that blade guide. So all we do is push it over, get a scrap piece of wood, just bump it out. I think this one is 2 inches, just enough to clear that blade guide. And then Bob's your uncle, and you can start cutting again. As you can see, we have plenty of clearance. So this customer wants 10-quarter lumber out of all of his Douglas Fir. So right here we have a 4-quarter scale and a regular tape on the other side. So right here, 4-quarter, 6-quarter, 8-quarter, 10-quarter. And now what we like to do is, as we do our next cut to make it parallel to the bottom and start taking slabs out of it, is to utilize the entire log as much as possible and not be left with a piece that is too thick or way too narrow. Is as we measure up the blade to the log, we'll go up this scale, and so right here we'll go to 10-quarter. And then we'll keep going up and make sure that we're all divisible by 10-quarter. That way we can maximize the yield, instead of, like I said, that bottom cut being way too thick or way too narrow, or making an extra cut that is not necessary. Now in this video, we're not actually doing for production. Usually I'm a lot quicker with this, but filming takes a lot more time, especially explaining stuff like this. And so one thing I do want to measure, one thing I do want to make clear is the quarter scale is not true as far as 4-quarter is not an inch. If you look between the 4-quarter mark and the 1-inch mark, the 4-quarter mark should be about 1/8 more. And that keeps going up with your number. So you have 8-quarter, which is 2 1/4. And then you have another, say, 12-quarter at 3 inches. You have about just shy 3 1/2. This is going to keep going up 1/8 of an inch. We do mill a bit heavy. We don't do scant cut. So if you order 8-quarter material from us, it's not 2 inches, not 2 1/8. Usually our 8-quarter is 2 1/4. That way you can get what you yield or what you want out of the wood, and you can yield what you expected to yield. Granted, we don't have an eye-dry system or a vacuum kiln, so we just mill a little bit heavier to offset the fact that some stuff comes out of the kiln a little bit wonky. We do our best not to have it come out that way, and we're building a new kiln to make sure it doesn't come out that way. But we rather give the customer more for less money than, say, give them 2 1/8 and not be able to get, you know, 1 7/8 or something like that out of the material. So we're at 4-quarter. We'll go up to 10-quarter. All right, the first mark. Go up another 10-quarter. All right, we can keep going up. Another 10-quarter. There we go. We can do one more and see where we land at, which ends up being right here on 10-4-quarter right there. And then we'll pan you guys over here. That way you can see that our top cut, we're going to utilize all the log. This will be our waste cut, and then we'll get 10-quarter out of the whole thing. This cut took a little bit longer, and as we were cutting we could feel a little bit of resistance. We noticed the blade dip ever so slightly, like 1/8 of an inch in one spot, and so we knew it was time to change the blade. Now, one thing to note, bark on Doug fir is extremely thick and will dull the blade very quickly. We usually try to scrape off all the bark, but due to time constraint, we definitely did not have enough time. So we're going to loosen up the blade tensioner, and we're going to give a couple of love taps to push over that carriage on that side that tightens up the blade. And then we're going to change the blade out. This is how we fold up a bandsaw blade. You want the teeth facing out, away from you. Put good pressure right there in the center. Rotate your hand 180 degrees to get a nice twist in it. Once that comes right back around, you tuck her in. Unhook the tooth on your finger. Bada bam, bada bam. And now how we unroll a brand new blade. You'll see it wanting to come apart. You just kind of help her along here. Watch your fingers, it is sharp. Grab the back side of the blade and zoing, there it is. Now that does get a bit sketchy, and if that touches you, it does draw blood. Ask me how I know. And now we're gonna add the blade back on. I did lose my bungee, so you see me holding up the top of the cover with my head. Struggling a little bit there as it's kind of awkward. But our blades are 1.25 inches wide by 176 inches long. They are double hard Woodmizer bandsaw blades. So we have everything pretty well lined up, and then we tension up the blade. As you see, there's a little spring that keeps tension on it so the threads don't back out, and then you see that little red mark there. We're going to keep tightening that, and then we rotate the wheel. And we look at where the blade guide is relation to the gullet on the bandsaw blade. Now I forgot to film that, but the gullet is what removes the sawdust, so you want to be just behind the gullet. And then after that, we get some very nice clean cuts. So I do want to note that the blades are a 10-degree hook angle. And then once we get everything all milled up, we will label them, put them on our trusty little cart. Now I will tell you guys, just for the sake of this video, I use the cart, but typically I will grab my truck and just load them in the bed of the truck, making this process way faster. And once we push these logs on a cart down the road, we're going to bring them in the back. Here we have this extendable conveyor belt. So we're going to load them up and it's going to push it right in front of the kiln, ready to go in. Now this being Doug fir, we're not really worried about it. Usually we do like our lumber to air dry, like if we're doing hardwoods, we let them air dry for a couple of months, or we will vertically dry them to get as much moisture out of them as possible and not build up tension and drying too quickly. But Doug fir, we usually have that worry. Now I did not film us loading this log or doing the first cut, but this will give you an idea of how we typically will mill and run. We do not have to take a slab off every single time. You can make a cut, raise it up, bring it back, drop it down, and keep cutting until you run out of throat capacity. Now that would be between the bottom rails of the power head and the blade. As long as you fit within that, which ours is 12.5 inches, then you can keep making cuts. It does make production go a bit quicker, especially with logs like this, where you only have to move one slab and the whole thing is done. Now, if we had a telehandler, it'd be super easy because we would remove maybe one slab and then be able to pick up the entire log when it was all said and done and cut and load it in the back. We've had that happen on customers' lots whenever we drive out onto property. Usually they have an excavator or something if they have a lot of logs, and it just makes unloading way quicker. just running it this way instead of taking the slab off every single time. Also note that the weight will prevent the whole stack from moving over, like that cut you saw previously on our first jacket cut. It will want to yank the boards over. If you have multiple stacked on top, it prevents that happening just due to the sheer weight. I appreciate taking the time, and this is a video that we've been meaning to make. Just hopefully the weather worked out, and it finally did. Got some nice weather in Pacific Northwest where it's not raining every 10 minutes or so. Springtime. But on average, each one of those cuts was a minute 20 to a minute and 45 seconds. Near the end of the video where we kind of cut off, it went down to about a minute to a minute and 10, maybe a minute and 15 because we swapped out to a new blade. Now the video does kind of end abruptly because I looked at the time and filming slowed everything down. On average, we can mill and stack in the back and label, I think, up to about 15 to 20 logs a day. Now if we're just dead stacking them and moving them the next day, we can increase that substantially. And also all depends on how big the logs are, and there's a lot of variables, but on average we can go much faster. Even the setup time is significantly faster. But on this day, I had my CEO with me, and she has little legs, small feet, a lot more steps, a little bit clumsy, but you know, she's getting out there. She's getting her hands dirty, so it's better than having her sit inside and we're just kind of keeping an eye on her, and she's keeping an eye on us, looking at the quality control, making sure everything's coming out top notch.